computer. And we will be following up with our guests to continue to get input and share it back with you, whether that's via blog, via emails, online, because this is just the beginning of our board PowHER initiative. So thank you very much for being here to kick us off. So it is 3 o'clock. I'm going to officially welcome you to Board PowHER. In partnership with Denton's law firm, PowHER is thrilled to be able to launch into an initiative to encourage a dialogue around the concept of something that we've heard a lot about, but we wanted to deep dive into a little differently, perhaps. And there's been a ton of conversation about women on boards, why it's important, and what we're doing about it. What the angle that I wanted to take over the summer months in preparation for an event that we're preparing for in Edmonton, and hopefully onwards from there, is okay, so where are we at right now? A conversation with Canadian women about getting women on boards. Where are we at with this project in terms of our point of view? Where are we still getting stuck? What are the actual action items that need to be done? How do we take this conversation to the next level instead of just continuing to have the same conversations that we've had for the last 2, 3, or 10 years? So I asked 3 of the smartest women I know to help me kick off the conversation because I knew they'd have some great things to share. So without further ado, and if you're brand new to the webinar series, you'll find a lot more on our website. This is a continued series called Women Built to Scale. We have done one webinar at least every month of this year, and it's just tackling key issues that Canadian women are facing, whether that's in the spectrum of lifestyle or leadership, and encouraging dialogue and action around those issues. So I'm going to introduce each of our 3 guests individually, and I am going to ask them if they wouldn't mind adding to my very, very brief introduction, and also maybe just saying a few words about why they've agreed to be on this webinar with me today after being asked, and with their arm twisted maybe just a little bit, and why they feel it's so important to tackle this conversation and have a discussion today. So I will start with Heather Barnhouse, who is joining us by audio today. Heather has been an active corporate and commercial partner at the Denton's law firm in Edmonton for the past 14 years. And as I mentioned, we're extremely grateful to be working with Denton's on the Board PowHER initiative. And she also belongs to an internal group, which I'm hoping she'll say a little bit about, which is called Women Lead within Denton's. Heather, I will turn it over to you, please, to add to that introduction. Let the women know just a little bit more about you and why this is such an important initiative to you.
Sure. Well, thank you for that introduction. So as Charlene said, my name is Heather Barnhouse, and I'm a partner in the world's largest law firm in the Edmonton office. And I have a few reasons for being interested in this topic. First of all, a large part of my practice, probably I don't know, a third at least of my practice consists of providing advice and direction to entrepreneurs, women primarily, although not exclusively, women entrepreneurs who are looking to grow or scale their business. And within that context, that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different businesses, but the common theme is that in some way, shape, or form, they're all trying to grow their business. So sometimes that means looking for new markets, sometimes that means taking on new partners, sometimes that means going public. There's a whole bunch of things that could mean. In that context, there's and again, not just exclusively with women, but there's a large part of providing advice that we do around board governance. And one of the hot topics in the last few years is women on boards, or diversity and inclusion more generically. Women on boards being one sort of avenue or one bucket within that category. And so it's a topic that I'm seeing a lot of. It's a topic that I'm seeing a lot of interest in. and both from men who are chairing boards who want to make sure that they're hitting the best practices, or that they're getting the best bang for their board buck, if you will. Mm-hmm. So that's certainly interesting from my perspective, very timely and very topical. And then the third reason, as Charlene mentioned, we are working with Powerhouse on an event to be hosted in Edmonton later in the fall. And one of the motivating reasons for that is, as Charlene alluded to, the internal Denton initiative that we have called Women Lead, which is a group that's focused really on empowering, mentoring, coaching more junior students and associates who come into the practice, and making sure that they have the resources that they need in order to be successful and to be connected to the community and to the various organizations that they think are important. And so this is a really good alignment with all of those elements that Women Lead is trying to bring forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for being here today. I'm going to now introduce Kelly Garrett. Kelly is with us from Regina today, and she's CEO of Kelly Garrett Enterprises, a seasoned leader, executive coach, speaker, and consultant on leadership, internal culture change, team dynamics, and board governance. Kelly has been a huge support and resource to Powerhouse as we spread our wings into Regina. And Kelly, what can you add a little bit to that introduction and why this whole conversation is an important one to be had?
Sure. I am a recovering executive. I have been running my own business for 5 years now. So executive, I wasn't ambitious till I was about 38. And once I became ambitious, I didn't become ambitious actually till I was a VP. And then I thought I should maybe care about how these male critters around me were doing business. And I served as the only woman on an 8-person executive team for 10 years. And so it certainly opened my eyes to some of the wins and watchouts women in the workplace were experiencing. And I actually never really looked at gender personally that much. I mean, obviously I was aware if I was a woman dealing with a man, but I didn't ever let it define me. And I realized that it was preceding me as an identity a lot more than I wanted it to, and became interested in board governance about 10 years ago. I was the one responsible for all of the business strategy work at the company I was at, as well as dealing with the board extensively on enterprise risk reporting and their own governance. So I became certified as an ICD in 2011 and started actively looking for a corporate board position. I'm only on 2 to date, and have realized that despite a really extensive network and the credential and senior executive experience, it is really tough to get on boards. I wouldn't go so far as to say it is really tough for women to get on boards, but I know the statistics say that is so. So I will believe them, and I can tell you personally, it hasn't been easy, and I'm continuing to look, and I'm ardent about removing barriers for other women.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks very much. Kathy Warner has spent her whole career with Deloitte, and she is here today from Deloitte in Regina as well. She has been continually moving up in increasingly senior roles and is currently the Saskatchewan Marketplace Leader. Kathy, what would you like to add to that introduction and say about this whole conversation and why it's important for you to be here and for us to be having it?
Thanks, Charlene. You know, I am pleased to be here. I do think it's an important conversation. I'll back up and answer your question first. So, you know, I have been with Deloitte my entire career, and Deloitte has always encouraged its team to be leaders in the community. And so I served on my first board, albeit it was a very operational board, probably 20 years ago. And so I've been serving on boards ever since, watching the evolution of how it has played out. And it's an important conversation because the metrics aren't changing, right? There's all of these discussions about how do we make our boards with more diverse thought, but those numbers aren't necessarily changing. So that is one of the biggest reasons that I'm wanting to be involved in these conversations. We seem to be having them in lots of different venues, but this is a perfect opportunity. I think that the bar for serving on boards continues to rise, and so it's important to get tactical. I know that that's one thing that you're very passionate about, to get tactical about how we're going to get more women on boards. We're going to have to understand what the bar is and figure out how we're going to get there, because there is that readiness aspect that is an easy barrier, right, for keeping people off of boards. So that's why I'm here today, Charlene.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for pointing that out. It helps to describe what we're trying to do that isn't already being done. Like, I do want to give a huge shout out to the amazing organizations and the work that is being done. The last thing that I want to do is replication and duplication of efforts, which I think sometimes women fall into. There's an incredible initiative going on by the 30% Club. Catalyst of Canada is doing some incredibly great work. And bringing a lot of awareness to the conversation, which is really important. What we're focusing on with this drive, with this initiative, is the very tactile, the actions. Where are we at? Where do women feel they're at, and what do they need to keep moving forward? I found a stat in preparation for today. And it was, I'll just read it. It says, to reap the benefits of diversity, boards need at least 3 women, yet only 20.1% of all boards globally have 3 women. So it just shows that there is a lot of work to do. And I'm going to kick off our discussion today around a little bit of that conversation. We actually want to start to develop a little bit of a checklist from, just kick it off from this conversation. So if there was a board ready checklist for women that are part of the conversation today, in your mind, what would some of the specific actions or tangible steps be in terms of your opinion and your own experience, your own observations? I'd love to I will be following up and recording, and we'll start to be actually making this into a tangible tool. But I remember having a conversation with Kathy once, and she was talking about the leadership ladder, and it was just this great visual. And I was like, yeah, and we also did, what are the rungs of that ladder? And we also did a pre-webinar survey, which, it had actually some great response and input. So thank you if you participated in that. And one of the questions that came in, which I did share on LinkedIn, was, are you talking about corporate boards? Are you talking about nonprofit boards? Are you talking about operating boards or governance boards? And it came in as a question, but again, it helps to get a perception of where women are at. And to be really honest, I think it's an important one. Where do nonprofit boards fit into the leadership ladder? And are we aware of how different things help us to prepare to be more board ready? So I'm just sharing some of that as a bit of context for this first question. Heather, I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, to kick it off. We're looking for your thoughts on specific actions, tangible steps, not only from your own experience, but maybe observations that you've had in the past few years with the women who have been successful, and maybe those that haven't around you.
Yeah, so I have a bunch of things to say on this, but I'll try to keep my thoughts brief so that we can get some comments from some other people. I think there's a number of things that can be done, and some of them are really low-hanging fruit, and some of them are conversations or ideas that probably need to develop and mature a little bit. And I think, some of these things are really simple. I think there's a few things. One, I think it's really important for women not to get discouraged. So like Kelly was saying, you know, there's in her own personal experience, it's difficult to get on boards. I have a similar, I guess, context or similar experience with that. But having said that, I've seen lots of women who have you know, a perception in Canada that you need to have some governance training, and I strongly believe that. I think that only helps your understanding and helps you focus on what it is you can actually provide when you're providing advice. That said, a lot of women that I know that are on really high-end corporate boards or bank boards or research organizations, they don't have that formal governance training when they first get on the board. So there's something other than that formal training that is, I guess, attractive or important to the organization that's looking to recruit these women. And then once they've landed on those boards, they almost all then, you know, proceed to take some sort of formal governance training. So I think one of the messages is I think you need to sort of keep an open mind and keep a view on what is it that you bring to the, maybe from the traditional elements in terms of, you know, the more formal training or some sort of, you know, professional background or something that might be considered, you know, a box for people to check, and explore those opportunities and explore what it is that you can bring to a board that may otherwise get overlooked, and then be open to experiencing the training and the educational piece that seems to go along with that. So I think that that's important to stay on top of that and really explore those sort of uncommon or not exactly known paths in order to get on board. And then the other thing is I do think that it is really important to, even if you haven't taken any formal governance training, to make sure that you're learning, so that approach of lifelong learning and wanting to be on top of the issues and the best practices, however you choose to do that. I think being aware of the issues and being aware of why it is an important reason for women to be on boards or to have diversity reflected on boards is also really important, so that when you are asked, they're not merely checking a box, but there's some substance to what you're bringing. And I think that's one of the downfalls that maybe some organizations have said, you know, took whoever we could and it didn't matter, we were checking a box, and then there's some issues with that, or it causes some credibility issues, which I think in turn makes it more difficult for, you know, future generations to get on those boards if that's been the attitude in the first place of how some people have landed there in the first place. So let me stop there. I've got more to say, sure, but let's turn that over to someone else.
Yeah, don't lose your thought, because we'll circle back, because this is very important. Kathy and Kelly, I just want to add one little thing, and I'm going to turn it over to both of you, whoever wants to punt it forward. But I think, you know, Heather talked about something that I think is so important, is know what you bring to a board. Know what, you know, and that definitely is that clarity when you're walking into any position and you need to sell yourself and be ready for it. Like, know specifically what you're bringing to a board that someone else may not have. And that goes back to Kelly's comment, which I thought, I wrote it down because I thought it was so interesting. She didn't want her gender to precede her as an identity. You know, like when I go walking into a situation, I want to be known for what I will bring to that situation, not because I'm walking in there, you know, as a woman. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts specifically around, you know, women being ready and really knowing, like really being ready and knowing what they bring to the game. Because I think sometimes my worry about this conversation is that it might be getting a little bit too general, and you know, we're trying to get on a board. Okay, well, back up a step. What are you bringing to that conversation? What are the 5 boards that you're getting ready for? Have you interviewed anyone on those boards? Do you know what those kind of things? So I think I'm trying to maybe take the level of conversation even a little bit more specific, and hoping to give you some context, or maybe get something buzzing in your brain around that, about really setting a very specific goal like we would around anything else, and then going hunting for it a little bit. Either of you, I'll punt it off to you.
Go
ahead,
it,
Kelly.
Kathy.
Okay, I'll go, because I always talk. So I think that's right. I mean, you have to understand what you're bringing, right? So you need to develop a thoughtful CV that goes through what your experiences are and how that will help whatever board you get on. And whether they ask for a CV or not, that will help you. Most corporate boards, large nonprofits, they all have skills matrix, right? So they are trying to line it up. They'll have skills for, industry and professional, whether it be legal or financial or accounting or marketing or media or whatever it is. And then they'll have diversity, right? So they'll have some foundational pieces to that matrix. And so you do kind of want to make sure you're working diligently, I would say, to fit into some of those boxes. Mm-hmm. And you help you articulate that. And it will also give you something to know that you're interested in doing board work and trying to increase that cohort, because that is important, right? You actually need to declare it. People aren't going to come looking for you because they know your name. You need to work to get prepared for it. I think that the training that Heather talked about is important, but the continuing education, so there's lots of those opportunities for continuing ed that those institutes, whether it be the charter director or the ICD or whatever, so those are where the board members hang out, right? Because they're all trying to get continuing ed. And so when you go to those things, you only have to go to the luncheon, pay the non-member price, right? And go to the luncheon, meet the people. You need to expand your cohort, I think, because the one thing that I would have observed over the past number of years is that cohorts follow each other. Like you go to any boardroom and you talk to a couple of the directors and you will find there's at least one other board that both of them sit on, right? Because one of them got there and they pulled the other one along, and that's how that works. Which is, to Heather's other point, is that when you get on a board, you have to show up every day extremely well prepared so you can, participate fully. Mm-hmm. and be recommended for the next one, right? Because you want those board members to pull you on to the next one.
Yeah. I love how specific that, sorry to interrupt that, I love how specific that suggestion was to, it may not be in your schedule or your budget at this moment to do the full ICD, certification, but just start going to some workshops, pay the non-member price, some continuing ed opportunities, and do some networking there. If you want to be on a board, then go to a place where board members are hanging out. And I think and those are the kind of tactile suggestions that I hope that, that women, that we will start to really think about, as well as the bigger, the bigger commitments. There's obviously a number of things that we're going to be looking at here, but just start, just take a step, right? Yeah. Very cool. Kelly, what do you think about this specific actions in your experience and in your observations? If we were creating a top 10 checklist, some items big and some items maybe not so big, what would you think would be on that?
Well, I agree with everything that Heather and Kathy said. I'll just expand on a couple of their thoughts. One is know what you bring to the table, AKA know what your value proposition is. And make sure that your take on what your value proposition matches what other people's take is. Mm. And remember that your value proposition has followed you around everywhere you went. And so it astounds me the reach of every interaction we have. So, I'll be sitting at the board table and we'll be talking about potential nominees. and someone will have worked with that person somewhere or served on a volunteer board, and they weren't very reliable, frankly. And so their name gets struck off the list. Or they're known as someone who doesn't listen well. So you can have all the credentials, but the dynamics of the boardroom and board fit are very important and are something looked at more and more. So know what your value proposition is, and make sure that you know wherever you go, there you are, as the Buddhist saying goes. So your reputation precedes you. I can't stress enough the importance of networking, and I think Charlene wants to get into that more in a moment. So I will leave that for now. Have a director's CV. So I got contacted by ICD, and that's where I had received my credential. And it is very hard to get your first corporate board appointment. And the guy who called me said, only about 20% of their opportunities are advertised on their ICD members only website. The other 80%, they contact him directly and his colleague. And he said, you're getting a lot of hits, but we're not getting very far. And so he took the time to go through my CV with me and share that I needed to create a different CV that was a director's CV. So it zeroed in more on what Kathy referenced in terms of understanding what the board competencies are and how you fit against those, even if it's volunteer boards. And I had served on probably 20 over the last 20 years. You know, where had I been chair of an HR committee? Where had I brought something new into existence, et cetera? So that was a bit of an aha for me. Mm-hmm. One of the sets of interviews I went through recently was not successful. They ended up going with someone with investment experience, which I did not have, but I got good feedback pre and post. So I went through 3 interviews, 2 by phone and 1 in person. And after I didn't get it, the recruiter from Vancouver said, you need to know that the vast majority of board appointments still are through who you know. So it's what Kathy and Heather were saying in terms of cohorts follow each other around. So it's really important, back to the networking key message. The other thing was references. Know who your references are going to be and who is going to speak very highly of you and has some direct experience of you at a boardroom table, even if it's volunteer. You don't have a lot of time when an opportunity arises, so you need to be able to call those people right away.
Thank you. I really appreciate how specific some of your reply was, Kelly. I love that, and it got me jotting down people that I need to be asking some specific references for. I'm going to try to tie our next question in with this conversation so that it threads together. And that is, there's 2 bits to it. One is the networking, and one is visibility. They do go hand in hand, but they're separate. So I'm going to just make a couple comments, and then I'm going to let you fly at her. When I speak of networking, I am not necessarily talking about what is the next women's event that you're going to. And don't get me wrong, obviously, you know, I love women's events and I think that they're extremely important, obviously. However, when I'm talking about networking, in this case, I'm talking about know who you need to get in front of. Again, I think, like, can we zero it down and get more specific? So I think sometimes, you know, again, women hear this like, it is who you know, but then get really specific with it. Who are the boards that you feel you're either attracted to, you feel that there's something that you could really contribute, they align with your mission, and then start to look at who is currently on that board and who in your network knows those people. Like, I think we need to be a little bit more strategic. And when I say the word networking, I don't just mean, you know, going to yet another wine and cheese. You know, obviously that plays a role because that gives you practice feeling comfortable talking about yourself. But when I talk about networking, I'm talking about strategically knowing how to get in front of who you need to get in front of to make the next step happen. So I'm going to ask for some more thoughts around networking from each of you, but I wanted to share that context. That's what I think about networking. The other part is visibility. Obviously, you know us, Powerhouse being a media company, we do it because we think visibility is so important, and women, quite frankly, hate to brag about themselves. At least most women do. There is a group of women from the States, as well as a group back east, that I'm following quite closely, because they're doing a great job of profiling women who are looking for board positions, and they're also profiling women who and celebrating when they do get into board positions. And so I want to have some conversations to ask them how they feel that is working. I do see the best examples right now from the States, quite honestly. What I like about building visibility around women who are looking for board positions is it first, the process forces us to get really clear on what, as Kelly put it, what our value proposition is. We have to get really clear in order to create our own profile to be visible. And also to have a good hard look at, what is the reputation that I'm bringing forward to this. I'm wondering, again, your thoughts not only on networking, but also visibility. How important do you think that's, an important thing that's holding women back, or that's not part of this discussion, and that maybe Shar is too focused on the media part of things and needs to give her head a shake, that's not one of the things that's right up there at the top. And so I'm going to go in reverse order this time, if that's okay, just because it's unfair to that last person that's always like, well, I agree with that, nothing more to add. Kelly, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit to start, and just go reverse order this time around, either about networking or visibility or both, whatever your thoughts come up.
Well, I think they're intertwined and they're both important. I think for sure, female networking is groovy. I never really did much of it until I joined the Women Entrepreneurs organization here when I jumped from my corporate job 5 years ago. So it was interesting and there was camaraderie there, but I think I have focused my networking more on professional development events, ICD events, even a boring chamber meeting or things like that. You never know who you're going to meet at any of these things. But networking is also parties and everywhere you go. I think tied to the value proposition needs to be the elevator speech, which literally needs to be, 3 key points, not a speech. And so, a lot of times you meet someone at a party, and even after they've droned on for a few minutes, you're not really clear what it is they do unless they say accountant or lawyer or whatever. And so, if one of the 3 things you say is I'm a consultant and an expert on business strategy, and I recently started serving on corporate boards and I'm looking for more, someone may remember that. Because you never know who knows who. It shocked me. I think it was Kathy who mentioned it earlier. Let people know you're looking. I remember saying to someone very senior at an organization last month that I was looking, and he was shocked. He didn't know, and he thought highly of me and asked for my CV. So you just never know. On the visibility front, the way I got my first corporate board appointment was I do a lot of speaking on a number of topics. One of them is on business strategy and enterprise risk. I was hired to do an internal workshop for a board of directors. The chair loved me for some reason, took me to lunch and said, I'm going to get you on our board. It took him 2 years and he did get me on the board. So that one presentation ended up unexpectedly. That's not why I did it. I mean, I was paid to do it, so that was nice too. But that was an unexpected way I got on that one. So finding platforms where you're going to talk about things that might intrigue a potential someone who's on the nominations committee or a chair or whatever says, oh, that person has expertise in this area and we lack that, and they sounded mildly intelligent and looked like they were a decent human. So all of those are some ideas for you. Just as a last comment, Charlene, you mentioned initiatives that are specifically geared towards getting women on boards. I was chosen as one of the Diversity 50 in 2013, which is related to, I can't remember, I should remember the name of the organization, but I'm sorry I don't, but it's affiliated with ICD. It's not geared just to get women on boards, it's also to get other minorities on boards. So yes, women are minorities when it comes to boards. And so that includes people of color, Indigenous people, people with disabilities. So it was not my route yet to the 2 boards I'm on, but I was named one of those. And so there was some interesting additional support as a result of that.
Nice, thank you. Kathy, what would you like to add to this part of the conversation around networking, visibility?
I think it's important, Shirley. You know what, I maybe should have said in my opening context, I'm all about readiness at this point. As you know, with Deloitte as an auditor, that's my day job. I can't serve on corporate boards. So I'm not in the process of looking for a corporate board. I'm all about getting ready, building my CV, right, so that when that time comes. So what I'm doing, I can tell you what I'm doing, but I can't tell you what I did because I'm not there yet. Like I'm not where Kelly is and I'm not sitting on boards, but I'm not looking for them. So I can't even tell you my experience. But I think going to those events is important, having that CV. So in my job, I have the opportunity to present to boards every week. Like I'm talking to board members all the time. And so that network continues to grow. So when the time is right, I will think about who I know and who can help me. But, and I think that's smart. And you keep that Rolodex of people that that you had a good relationship with, because it is this cohort. Like you can just watch it happening. And so I think that that's the right answer. As far as visibility goes, I do think it's important. So Charlene, I think you're doing good work there, because I think that is really important that we are having conversations, that people are talking about it, that men and women are having the conversation. I think that everybody needs to understand it, so that when every board gets to have 50% diversity, whatever that diversity means, those conversations are better and the organization's more profitable. Like there's lots of statistics for that, right?
Heather, I'm wondering, and again, you might want to tackle this even a little differently, around the networking and around visibility. Perhaps those aren't, like in your experience, maybe those aren't, as important as or maybe as I'm putting them, maybe there's a slightly different slant or twist that you'd like to look at them. And I just wonder, hearing these comments, where would you like to take this part of the conversation?
Yeah, thanks. So I guess I have a couple of comments. One, just like Kelly said, it can take some time, I think, to get on corporate boards, and I think that's fine. And I don't think that people should sell themselves short and view being on a not-for-profit board as somehow less honorable or less prestigious as being on a corporate board. I think that not-for-profit boards sometimes get a bit of a bad rap for being sort of a training ground for corporate boards. But in some cases, I think that that's true. And in some cases, the issues aren't exactly the same. In all cases, I'm generalizing. I realize that in some cases they could be, but in some cases they're actually more diverse. The issues are more diverse, and the people, the stakeholders, whether that's the other board members or the members or the affiliates or whatever's appropriate for the particular board, sometimes that consultation process is actually more complicated and more regulated, particularly if a not-for-profit, for example, has charitable status and they don't want to lose that charitable status by doing something dumb. So that training ground, if you will, I think is actually highly relevant and highly important, and one of the ways that you can use that perhaps as a bit of a launching pad into a different type of board. So I want to say, from a networking and perspective, don't underestimate that. One other thing, and this applies whether it's a not-for-profit board or a corporate board, when you're on those boards, put up your hand and volunteer to do the things like be on the nomination and governance committee, and that way you get a hand in shaping who it is you're going to have succeed you. And a good board knows that one of its sort of never-ending tasks is replacing itself, and that's succession planning. And if you can have a say in that and a say in shaping what the next generation will look like, you have a direct influence on being able to consider people who may or may not otherwise be considered, which goes to who's in your network, who's in that Rolodex, all the things that we've heard so far. And people, have sort of times when they want to be on a board and times when they can't be on a board. And so staying in touch and knowing who's up and ready to move into that role is really helpful. For example, I'll give you one very specific example. I'm currently the president of a not-for-profit board. It's a national society called the Life Saving Society, which is a drowning prevention organization. And I just became the president in June. And I've already sort of thought through who the next president should be, thought through who the next corporate secretary should be, because I really think that it is important to start planting those seeds and find the people who will succeed you. And I encourage people to look at that and sort of look in their networks, and then in the networks, bring that forward at every board meeting and say to the other people who are sitting around the table with you, look, in 2 years or whatever the timeline is, we're going to have a vacancy, and here's the kind of things that we need to think about, and how is it that we're going to fill this position, so that when the time comes, there's a plan in place. That plan, of course, can change, but there's a plan in place, and then you're simply executing a plan as opposed to reacting or in some sort of crisis management mode where you just have to fill the position regardless of who it is. So I do encourage that proactivity and that succession planning, and that does tie in directly to the networking around with the people around the table as well as their contacts. It also gives you then the opportunity to go and meet with these people in whatever, if you're looking for somebody to replace you in 2 years, you then have some time to meet with them and figure out their thoughts and ideas and how the board can really move forward. Nice. The second thing that I'll say in terms of that visibility is I don't think that that's exclusively a women's issue. And for example, so I work with a lot of lawyers, obviously, and many of them have taken the ICD training, including sort of somebody that, there's the rap that all boards are full of men and they're male, pale, and stale. And so I work with a number of them who fit perfectly in that categorization. And they've taken their ICD, and they also can't get on corporate boards. And they're lawyers, they're professionally trained. Lots of them have litigation experience at senior leadership positions, managing partners, et cetera. And they too can't easily or as easily as one would think, get on corporate boards. And so I do think that visibility is important, but I don't think that that's exclusively a women's issue.
Oh, fully agree. Yeah, no, fully agree. Great. Thank you so much. I was trying to think of all the things I wanted to quickly cover, but I think the one thing that Heather said that I'd like to just reiterate is know where your training ground is. Know where your training ground is. And what we're going to try to do with your help is to create, to steal Kathy's analogy, that leadership ladder. Figure out where you're at now, and then, okay, you've put this piece in place, so then now you need to be working on this piece. I'm going to ask you just to give it some thought. We're going to have 15 minutes here. We have time for 3 questions or comments from anybody that's with us today. So I'll take 3 questions or comments. So if you want to try to put your I think there's a way to put your hand up, or you can just send me a note in the chat. And if you don't, I will just keep barreling through. But I do want to just open it up. I'm going to just give you a little bit of food for thought while you think about, do I have a question or a comment? This is only the beginning of this conversation. This is not the end, and you'll see how we're going to continue it online and with another webinar. I'm coming off of a 2-year municipal government council term. And so I definitely have quite a bit of community leadership, policy setting, governance experience, which I'm going to take into a corporate board setting. I definitely have a strategy in place, and I'm going to share a couple of steps with you on that strategy, because I hope that it is helpful to you. I will definitely be continuing to build my visibility. But I think the piece that I want to just share with you is know who you're ready for. So I'm actually going to choose 5 corporate boards that I would very, very much be interested to sit on any one of them. And it might not happen overnight, but I'm going to start that journey. So I'm not just going to like hope I get put onto a corporate board. I'm going to know which ones that I'm looking to get on. And I also will be really, really leaning on my network to get me in front of who is currently on that corporate board, so they know who I am, that I'm looking, what I'm ready for, what I would bring to it. And I think this is where, the networking does come into place. Like, I can't tell you how much it means to me to have powerful women. Like, you tell them that you're looking for something, you're needing something, and you're just saying, do you happen to know this person or that person? And sure enough, somebody knows somebody, and it's just within, typically a month that you're in front of that person. So I tell you this because I think we need to take our hunt very, very specifically and with some strategy behind it. Know where you're looking to get on, which boards really interest you. You think you could really be a valuable asset to, why you're different, why you're unique, what you think you could add to the board that they might be looking for. So I'm not sure. I just share that for some food for thought, and why I personally find this a very interesting conversation as well as professionally. Is there anyone that has a comment or a question that they'd like to add to the conversation? I will unmute you if I know that you do, and don't be afraid to add it in the chat, or if I can tell that you have your hand up, I will definitely unmute you as well. And if not, I will turn back to our panelists.
I have a question for Kelly.
Go for it.
Kelly, you talked about references. Have you given them the heads up that you would like to use them as a reference in the future, or do they know?
Yes. So one is the chair of the board, who tirelessly got me on the board and then continued to like me, thank God, after 2 years of working with me. The other is the chair of a board. I do governance training and board dynamics, culture, team effectiveness consulting work. And so the chair of a major company in Western Canada has agreed to be my reference. They've hired me back 3 years in a row, so I figure they think I'm decent. And the third one is Betty Ann Heggie, who some of you know, who was a very senior executive at Potash Corp in Saskatchewan, now lives in Toronto and Arizona. And she is a proponent of many women. She's how I met Charlene, actually. She does lots of virtual introductions. And so she has agreed to be a standing reference, as have the other two.
Nice.
One of the things that me and some of my cohort have been talking about is building this board book, right? And asking for when you sit on a board, even if you're on the ladder to become the chair eventually, to ask the prior chairs for a letter of reference that you just keep adding to your board CV.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good idea. I never thought of that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I would add, to cycle back to volunteer boards, I know Kathy has done a ton of this kind of work as well, is you never know who's going to be on one of those boards who may help you in the future. I chaired Hospitals of Regina Foundation after serving on that board for a while. I've served on little wee nonprofits. I'm probably a lifer with the Autism Resource Center because we can never get enough board members, and I have a grown son with autism, so it's a cause that matters to me. But you end up through fundraisers and various other interesting things, meeting people who know someone. And as that recruiter from Vancouver said, it is still mostly someone who knows someone who puts your resume, which then has to have meat in it and so on, in front of others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it definitely is, and we'll dovetail into just a quick question if there's anything we haven't covered yet on best practices. But I think that's exactly it. Like, it's that dance between making sure there's meat in your CV and then making sure that it's visible, that it's getting in front of the right people. So it's that continual dance between readiness and visibility. Any questions from anyone else? Otherwise, I will turn to the panelists one more time. Carrie, thanks, Carrie, for being here. Carrie Dillon, I'm just going to unmute you. Yeah, go for it with comments, questions. What would you like to add?
Yeah, no, so I chair a bunch of not-for-profit boards and have sat on a bunch of them. The place where I'm struggling is actually taking that traditional CV that I have and morphing that into a board CV. So I'm wondering if there's any tools, resources, or people out there that can, because where I struggle is obviously making that transition and understanding what should go in, what shouldn't go in, as well as it's just a completely different environment. So I'm just wondering if there's any tools, tactics, people out there that's a worthwhile investment.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question and for bringing it up. That's one of the exact things that we want to do is at the end of this initiative to have the 2 or 3 really, really tangible, tactile tools, the things that we can, deliver that are most needed. And so if that's what we're hearing, like to your point, whether we're talking with some of the great women in our circle, maybe approaching some of the recruiters, maybe going back to the ICD colleagues that I know some of these women have great relationships. If that's one of the tools that we need to prepare, I will commit to making sure that a template is prepared as a tool. Heather, do you have any thoughts around that? Have you seen a decent template? I know Kelly's gone through this process, and I think that's part of it. Like, every single woman is like in that little silo. Like, can we not, if there's a decent template to be had, maybe there's one out there already, but I'd be more than willing to help to quarterback bringing that forward.
Yeah, and even if it's not template, just resources or because I think as women, particularly me, I'm not good at kind of shouting out my own story in a way that it's going to be heard.
Yeah. Heather, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. So it's a really good question. I don't have a great answer for the template. I've seen lots of variety, and I've seen, I in some ways, maybe this is the lawyer in me, but in some ways, I don't like to be a slave to a precedent or to a template, because I think some of the things that we've heard on this call is that you really do want to customize it, and you do want to say, here's what I'm bringing to this board, and here's why you should consider me. Now, having said that, I think that you may be able to achieve that in your covering letter, so you may be able to achieve some of the customization or the distinction in the covering letter, and then still have that more templated form of a board CV that you would attach. But even that, I think you want to be careful, and you want to make sure that you're highlighting. It goes to the question of what are you bringing to the board, and what are they looking for, and really understanding your audience and making sure that your CV and your covering letter addresses the particular need at the right time. Now, having said that, and this is a point that I could have made in some of my earlier comments, there are, and ICD is a great example, because of course they're probably in Canada the authority on these things, they have lots of resources and lots of sort of templates, if you will, from from governance policies to code of ethics to on and on and on. They have a bunch of sort of templates and best practices that are available to their members. The other thing to think about, if you are even on a not-for-profit board, they have programs or resources that are available to the board. So whether the individual has taken the ICD course or not, you can get, and it's fairly cheap, like I think it's around $200 or so for an annual subscription or an annual membership for the board as a whole to get access to those documents. And so one of the things that I think is important is to show the board that you're on, that you're interested in that continuing education and that lifelong learning, and to make those resources available to the board. And so that's that kind of resource that's fairly accessible. It's accessible to everybody who's a member of that board. They get a login, and then they can continue to access that kind of material. I am a proponent of sharing that kind of knowledge. The other thing is, like Kelly was saying, there are consultants, law firms, we do this. We will tailor governance presentations to your specific board. So if you're in an industry that might have some additional compliance or something that's a little off the straight and narrow, don't be afraid to ask your board, even if it's a not-for-profit board, to give you that kind of customized training. That again serves as sometimes a doorway to greater learning, but also to additional individuals who may have some expertise in the area who can jump on and provide some of that additional networking, additional visibility, get to know the people who are really interested in the area and who are seeking out additional information.
And Heather, I will definitely follow up with you on this, but just so I don't forget, is there a specific name to the not-for-profit resource for the board that you're like, if you're actually trying to tell, and we can follow up on it, but if you're trying to talk about this to your board, is it just like the resources for a board overall from ICD? I'm just wondering what the actual name of that is.
Yeah, ICD would have a tab on its website devoted specifically to not-for-profit.
Got it.
And there clearly would be some overlap between sort of the mainstream and not-for-profit, because governance doesn't change whether you're for-profit or not.
Yeah, exactly. Oh no, that's great. Thank you. We are, and this is what I mean, 60 minutes goes very quickly, and we will continue the conversation. So I'm going to ask the panelists just for a couple of quick closing thoughts. To those of you who are on the webinar or who have signed up to get the recording, you'll see how we're going to continue the conversation in a follow-up email, but basically it is utilizing our website, our blogs, continuing to ask questions and dig for answers as we've started to uncover today. And simply by using the hashtag on social media with a question or a comment, board power with the HER. So you can help us continue this conversation. Our next webinar will be towards the end of September, once we are done with gathering some more input and questions and do some digging after this one. But Kelly, I just wanted to give you a couple of, just closing thoughts or any thoughts that you want to leave us with today.
Well, I think it was Heather, but maybe Kathy echoed it. Remain optimistic. It is a journey, even if you're pale, stale, and male. I love that. We may be pale, but we're not stale and male. Some of us are pale anyway. So I would say remain optimistic, number one. Number two, remember that your reputation precedes you. So make sure that it is as good as you can make it. And thirdly, this is a bit of a funny one to say, but women can go more horribly wrong on the image front than men. The pale, stale, and male, or even the colored dudes, they pretty well have a uniform. They are either wearing a suit or they're wearing Dockers and a golf shirt. And, it's hard to go wrong with that, no matter what they look like. Women can go terribly wrong in a bunch of different ways. So I happen to be a bohemian fringe loving chick, and I find suits with fringes and stuff. So I'm not at all saying you got to wear the navy blue suit. But whether you're at the grocery store, especially living in Regina, I'm from Montreal, my God, everywhere you go, you see people you know. Dress the way you would want to be perceived if you were to bump into someone who could get you on the next board.
Great thoughts. Thank you. Great closing thoughts. Kathy, any closing thoughts for us today?
So I guess I have two. I would say if you're specifically targeting boards, like pay attention to who's on the board from a gender diversity standpoint. So if there's 3 women there, you know, they understand the importance of, you know, you quoted that statistic at the very beginning, Charlene, and that's a, you know, that's a catalyst study that's long been researched, and good boards who want to get the benefits of diversity are doing that. So if you're targeting boards, look for those kind of boards to start, right? Don't, you know, being the only woman is going to be challenging, very doable, right? But challenging. And if you can get the 3, that's better. But I'm very much with Kelly, and that I think that you need to think about how you act once you get there, right? You need to figure out how you're going to deal. I've had some great chairs over the years, right? I used to wait until everybody had said their piece, and then if what I was thinking didn't get said, that's when I would raise it, right? And he said, no, you got to go first sometimes. You just have to use your voice, and you have to be first sometimes. And you have to, you know, I think that women tend to internalize, and we have to get used to the idea that smart people disagree. And if you disagree, you disagree, and that life goes on, right? So I think you do have to give yourself some permission to use the diversity, and the reason you're there is because you think differently. So just get comfortable with that. So those are the 2 things I would end with.
Yeah, great. Those are awesome. Heather, I am going to ask you to have any last words, any closing words today.
Yeah. So I agree with everything, of course, that's been said. And the one other thing that I think that, again, really easy to overlook, low-hanging fruit. Don't be afraid to, you know, stalk the board in the nicest possible way. But if there's a board that you're interested in being on, don't be afraid to make it known. And whether that's, you know, engaging with the chair of the Nomination and Governance Committee to let them know, whether that's attending events. So lots of the boards that, you know, if it's a hospital foundation, they'll have fundraisers, they'll have community events. Attend those things, and that shows that you're not just sort of waiting in the wings, but you're active, you're out there, and you're doing what you can to, number one, meet the people who are currently on the board who might have some ability to influence who succeeds them, and also to learn more about the organization, so that at the time that you do end up with that interview, you can say, you know, I attended this event, and here's what I really liked about it, and here's how I found that the organization was interacting with its stakeholders. Don't be afraid, as I say, in the nicest, you know, least criminal way. Don't be afraid to stalk the boards that you absolutely are interested in going after.
A lawyer told me to stalk you.
In the least criminal way.
That's right.
In a non-criminal way. Always the qualifier. Always the qualifier.
Exactly. No, great. I love it. And thank you very much to the panelists, Heather and Kathy and Kelly, very much for your time and for your input behind the scenes. You all know how much I appreciate it. This is just the beginning of the conversation. We are at time, so I will let you go. You will see very quickly how we're carrying on the conversation while you're enjoying the rest of your summer. And we'll have another webinar coming up towards the end of September. So keep thinking about your thoughts and your comments and what you need, and we'll take it from there. But thank you very much for being with us today, and for those who are going to be listening to the recording. Really very much appreciate it.
And thank you, Charlene, for holding the torch.
You're most welcome. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much.